The wind that morning carried the hush of something unfinished. It stirred the brittle grass and creaked the porch rail of Jedediah Holt's cabin like an old bone aching to speak. Mist hung low across the valley, veiling the cattle in silence. The kind of morning, Jed thought, when even God seemed to be walking softly. Then came the knock, 3 times, small and certain. Not a man's knock, not someone selling or seeking. Lighter. Like a memory pressing gently at the door. He rose from his creaky chair, slow as thawing ice, and opened it without a word. There stood 2 girls. Identical in every way but the way they looked at him. One had defiance tucked behind her dark eyes. The other, something closer to hope. Both were rail-thin, shivering under threadbare shawls and the kind of stubborn silence born of long travel and worse waiting. The braver one stepped forward. "We were told you needed us," she said, chin tilted like a question she already knew the answer to. "We'll work for free. Forever. Just keep us." Jed stared. No wagon, no guardian. Just 2 children with dust in their hair and stitched patches on their boot. He said nothing. Only looked down at them as if trying to see whether they were real or part of the sorrow that had long since made a home inside him. The girls waited. "I don't take charity," he finally muttered. "We ain't giving any," the second girl replied, voice soft as cottonwood fluff. He considered closing the door. Let them be the wind's burden, not his. But the taller one, the one with the voice that dared him, held out a folded scrap of paper. It was torn from a school ledger, bearing Clara Boyd's name. The schoolteacher had scrawled in pencil, "These 2 have nowhere else. You owe no one. But if you've still got room in that house of yours, give them a place. Or at least a roof for the night." He sighed. "The kind that leaves your chest hollower than it found it." "Well," he said, stepping aside, "don't touch nothin'. They entered quietly. The cabin didn't change shape, but something about it did shift, like a wound twitching under the first touch of healing. The girls moved without instruction, setting their satchels down by the hearth, eyes flickering over the cracked walls and dust-cloaked shelves. One found the fire poker and stirred the coals, coaxing warmth without asking. The other ran a hand over the armrest of Jed's worn chair, like she was reading his life from its grooves. "Names?" he asked, voice low. "I'm Maisie," said the bold one. "She's Mabel." Jed nodded. Sat back in the chair Mabel had just touched and looked out the window like there might be an answer out there waiting in the mist. Night fell quietly. The twins whispered under a shared quilt on the floor, their sentences broken, their laughter brief but blooming. Jed couldn't hear all the words, just the weight of them, the cadence of children who had learned to make joy out of broken things. He didn't sleep. His wife had died in this house, cradling the baby that never took a breath. After that, the cradle was burned, the midwife turned away, and the world was narrowed to cattle and silence. For years, Jed had believed the quiet was peace. Now it scratched at him, unmooring. The next morning, they worked. No request. No question. Mabel scrubbed the pans with wood ash and lye, humming low. Maisie chopped wood like she'd seen it done enough times to know how to not lose a finger. The yard looked different already. Tidier. Like someone had told it to stand up straight. Jed saddled his mule. He had to ride into town for feed. The girls followed him out. "You're not coming," he said. Maisie folded her arms. "You gonna leave us locked in your house?" He looked down at her. "You planning to rob me?" She shrugged. "Ain't got pockets big enough." Jed grunted, not quite a laugh, not quite a protest. He let them climb into the wagon. Dust Bell was the sort of town where news moved faster than trains. The moment Jed's wagon rolled past the mercantile, heads turned. Ruthie Clay, all lace collar and vinegar tongue, peered over her spectacles. "Well, I'll be," she said loud enough for the boardwalk to hear. Jed Holt's grown himself a conscience. Or a pair of beggars. Sheriff Tom Wexler leaned against the post office doorframe, eyes unreadable beneath his hat. He said nothing, but his glance was heavy. Clara Boyd crossed the street, her apron stained with ink and chalk dust. She walked right up to the girls, crouched slightly. "Did he feed you?" she asked. Mabel nodded. "Then I'll consider my job done," Clara said. She gave Jed a look, quiet, sure, like a poker player laying down a hand he didn't know he'd been dealt. "Let them stay." He didn't reply. Just handed her the school ledger note and turned away. Back at the ranch, they unpacked the grain together. Maisie carried more than her weight. Mabel organized the tools with an eye for order. That evening, they made biscuits from scratch, using only flour, water, and a kind of hope that had no recipe. Jed sat outside after supper, pipe in hand but unlit. The air was warm, buzzing faintly with crickets and something he couldn't name. Inside, the girls had fallen asleep on the quilt, arms tangled, faces serene. He watched them through the window, then turned his gaze to the hills. The silence no longer seemed hollow. It was expectant. At midnight, he found a note on the table. Folded carefully, written in careful, looping print. "We understand quiet people. We understand broken things. You don't have to talk much. Just don't send us away." He read it twice, folded it back, slipped it into his shirt pocket like a keepsake too fragile to burn. And then he heard it, a faint sound almost imagined. A lullaby. Soft, cracked with sleep. Two voices blending into one. A melody he hadn't heard since the night his wife last smiled. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow would come. But tonight, something had returned to him. Not joy. Not yet. Something smaller. The ache of maybe. The barn caught fire just past dusk. The sky bleeding orange behind the hills like the land itself had opened a wound. Jed had only stepped inside for a tin of coffee, but the wind had shifted wild, cruel and sudden. He caught the scent first. Smoke thick with hay and old wood, betrayal hidden in its sweetness. Then came the crackle. He ran barefoot, forgetting the rifle he always carried, forgetting pain. The barn glowed like a furnace, alive and spitting sparks. For a breath, he stood still, a man struck not by fear, but by the paralyzing memory of losing everything once already. Then he heard them. Maisie's voice broke through the roar. "Mabel's in there." Jed didn't think. He charged through the smoke-blind door, heart battering against his ribs. Inside, he found her curled behind the tack bench, coughing but conscious, eyes wide with animal panic. He pulled her out like she weighed nothing and didn't stop until they were all three on the frost-dry grass, the barn collapsing behind them with a sound like bones giving way. Maisie dropped beside Mabel and wrapped herself around her twin, forehead pressed against soot-streaked curls. Jed sat back, chest heaving, watching the flames eat the roof of all he'd built. And for once, he didn't feel like it was punishment. Just a cost. They didn't cry. Not until hours later, when the sky turned black again and Mabel whispered, "We didn't want to lose you." The sentence wasn't loud, but it cracked something in him wider than fire ever could. He rebuilt the barn slowly, with the girls beside him. Each plank lifted like penance. Mabel painted flowers at the top of each beam, wild violets, sunbursts, tiny bees, turning the structure into a story. Maisie hammered with purpose, her brow furrowed in that same quiet fierceness she'd carried from the first knock. By the time the barn stood again, something invisible had taken shape among the timbers. Not love, not yet, but belonging. One morning, the air carried the smell of sun-warmed leather and molasses. Branding day. Jed hadn't hosted one in years, not since his neighbors stopped calling him by name and started saying, "That one up in the hills." He didn't invite anyone, but they came. By noon, the yard filled with cowhands and townsfolk. Jed stayed silent as ever, but the girls moved through the crowd like seasoned hands. Mabel brought out lemonade in chipped mason jars, each with a sprig of mint. Maisie hauled tack, shouted directions, even handed the sheriff a biscuit with a look that dared him to comment. And they did comment. Ruthie Clay watched from the edge of the fence, lips pursed so tight they looked sewn shut. "Well," she muttered, "the girls clean up nice. 4 strays." Then came the colt. Spooked by a falling saddle, It bucked and bolted straight toward the paddock gate. Men shouted, hands reached. But it was Maisie who moved, darting like lightning through boots and barrels, cutting off the colt's path with a crooked plank held like a shield. Mabel, calm as dusk, stepped forward and sang, not words, just a tune they'd always known. The colt stilled. Silence fell. Not heavy, awed. Sheriff Wexler tipped his hat toward Jed. Maybe they belong here after all. And for the first time in years, Jed didn't flinch from approval. He met the sheriff's gaze, chin steady. They been here the whole time. Just took the rest of us a while to notice. As the crowd thinned, Clara Boyd walked alongside him, her skirt dusted and her voice low. They changed this place, Jed. Changed you. He didn't deny it. She stopped, looked at him. Not like a woman sizing a man, but like someone who sees how far a tree has bent in wind and still grown straight. You're not lost anymore, she said. You're anchored. That night, the girls lit the lanterns early and sang while peeling potatoes. Mabel off-key. Maisie too loud. But Jed sat back in his chair, pipe warm between his fingers, and smiled with his eyes closed. Somewhere between the hum of oil lamps and the smell of hearth bread, a peace arrived, not loud, not bright, but real. Then came the knock. Jed opened the door, heart already wary. A man stood there, hat in hand, papers in his vest. Tall, leathered, with a salesman's smirk and a preacher's eyes. Name's Silas Thorne, he said. I'm their uncle. Maisie stood behind Jed, suddenly pale. Mabel's hand clutched her sister's sleeve. They told me they ended up here. Figured it was time someone took him back. Family's family. Jed didn't move. The girls were statues. Got papers, Silas added, flashing a county seal. Says I'm entitled. They're worth a good wage down in Laredo. Rail crews'll take 'em young. Jed took the paper. Scanned it. Legal. But cold. Like something made to excuse cruelty. The wind shifted. The night had gone still again, just like that first morning. You don't want them, Jed said, voice low, hardening. You want what they can earn. Silas sneered. They ain't yours neither. Jed looked down at the girls. Mabel, eyes wet but unblinking. Maisie, already stepping forward, ready to fight. And for the first time, Jed raised his voice. Not with volume, but with conviction. No, he said, they're not mine. But I chose them. That counts more than blood ever did. Silas stepped back. You gonna stop me? Before Jed could answer, a shadow appeared at the edge of the yard. Sheriff Wexler, hand on his belt, face unreadable. I heard everything, the sheriff said. And I got 3 witnesses who'll testify that man don't care 2 licks for them girls. Silas stammered. You got no right. I got all the right I need, the sheriff said, stepping closer. Now get out of Dust Bell. Don't come back. Silas spat in the dirt but didn't argue. He turned, muttered curses to the wind, and disappeared into the night like smoke without fire. Jed shut the door. Maisie's lip trembled. Not from fear. From relief. She looked at him, eyes shining. You kept us, she whispered. He nodded once. I did. That night they didn't sleep early. They made a cake with molasses and cornmeal, sang old songs, danced barefoot on the kitchen floor. Jed laughed. Fully, richly, like the earth under him had shifted and finally let him stand tall again. Later, after the fire burned down and the girls curled up in the quilt, he found the fiddle his wife had once loved, tucked away in the chest under her photograph. He tuned it slow, sat by the window, and played. The notes cracked, then found their shape. Soft, warm, like a porch light for lost things. Outside, the sky blushed with stars. And far off, past the hills and the hush, a new wind began to rise. The kind that only carries what's meant to stay.